Well, good evening. Welcome to StoriesRoc, or should I say Puttyfield's Fan Club. For whatever reason you're here, it's really lovely to see you. Thank you. StoriesRoc is an opportunity to share true personal stories on a common theme in front of a live audience. And so tonight, we are featuring stories about mystery. So you'll hear a wide variety of stories on that particular topic. Trevor Harrison is a father, architect, cyclist, and friend. He loves to work with his hands to build and repair things, and to work with his soul to build and repair himself. For this emotional construction, he enjoys sharing his thoughts through writing. And something you need to know about Trevor: starting this month, Trevor is the president of the board of directors here at Writers and Books.
Oh, great.
But his first introduction to the organization came when he was hired as the architect for a renovation of the second floor, which includes designing the space that we're sitting in right now.
Oh, nice.
He will tell his mysterious story of the prestigious bootlegger.
So no complaints about the space. On January 16th, 1918, the 18th Amendment of the Constitution was passed. I won't assume that any of us here were around at that time, so here's a quick refresher. The 18th Amendment banned the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors. Prohibition outlawed alcohol. I noted when I read this that the text of the amendment did not seem to outlaw drinking alcohol. Now, the 18th Amendment was intended to curb the evils of drinking. This had become pretty popular after the Civil War, but its intention backfired, and prohibition was blamed for the rise of organized crime in America. There were characters like Lucky Luciano and Al Capone, and they stole all the headlines. But there was another kind of profiteer from prohibition, and that was the common bootlegger. Prohibition caused thousands of people to lose their jobs. Factories and breweries closed, and along with those, closed the common saloon. But the reality is that the saloons only closed for a very brief period of time. They quickly reopened in back rooms and basements, and at an astonishing rate. These secret establishments, disguised as cafes and soda shops, were called speakeasies. And speakeasies were supplied by bootleggers. Now, Rochester, New York was commonly known to have at least doubled the number of drinking establishments within 1 year of the beginning of Prohibition.
Wow.
So one of the reasons that our town was so well known and such a good location for obtaining illegal hooch was our proximity to Canada. With a quick trip across the lake, bootleggers could provide our city's most elite with quality whiskey, not the bathtub gin that the commoners had to drink. And the man who brought those Rochesterians, those elite, their good whiskey, was a man named Charlie Cook, known as Charlie the Bootlegger. So let's jump from the 1920s to 1967. A young man, Derek, and his pregnant wife, Judy, move into a Brighton home with their one-year-old daughter. Now, this was a pretty huge purchase for that MCC professor, but it was a lovely corner house and great location, good schools, and all of that, and going to be a nice place for their growing family. The house was also the only one in the neighborhood that had an attached garage. Probably seemed like a dream when it came to winter. And inside that attached garage, the owners discovered a concrete stair that led down into the basement. And at the bottom of that stair was a heavy wooden door, a heavy steel lock. Derek, being a thinker, probably gave it a little bit of thought and thought that it was a bit odd. But he was busy and he never really went deeper into why this stair might be there. So years passed and the family grew. After the birth of the first son, there was another boy. Derek worked hard at his job, and he always made time for his family. During the school year, he came home early to play with his children, and then he would retire to his attic office to write papers or read grading papers. The office had no heat, and Derek survived those cold winter nights with a space heater that today would probably be considered illegal. But then in 1976, he decided he was tired of being cold and he was going to insulate the house. He wanted to keep his feet warm. So now, Derek's office was built in the attic of the house, up in the rafters, and it was built before he bought the home. The builder of that office constructed sort of short walls that ran from the rafters to the floor, called knee walls. Derek knew that to insulate, he was going to have to get into that triangular space, get to that floor. And the only way he could figure out how to do that was to cut a hole in those knee walls. So he did that, he cut a hole in those walls, and he peered inside, and what he found was the first step in a journey towards understanding the history of his home. In that space, Derek saw a series of cotton ropes. Ropes don't belong in an attic behind a knee wall that you could only get into by cutting a hole in it. So, obviously a mystery. And like any of us would do, Derek looked at those ropes and pulled one. And when he did, a section of that wall that he had just cut through opened up. And there was another rope. Derek pulled that rope. Another section of that wall he had just cut through opened up. Derek had bought a house with hidden walls, hidden rooms, moving walls, and had lived there nearly 10 years without knowing about this. So following along those ropes, Derek saw them disappear under the floor to a space that he couldn't get to. He went about his business, but in a way that normally would be convenient for the movies. Derek was walking around and one of those floorboards squeaked. And he leaned over and pushed one end of it, and the floorboard tipped up. And under that floorboard was the ends of cotton ropes tied off. Derek pulled on one of those, and that wall opened up. Derek pulled on another, and another wall opened up. So each wall was controlled by a rope terminating under a squeaky floorboard in an attic. Now, to construct something like this, you'd have to do it when the house was built. The records for this era aren't really great, but it was found out that the house was built sometime between 24 and 28 by a man named Charles D. Cook, Charlie the Bootlegger. Derek began to put the pieces together, and the story became even more interesting. So he contacted a man named Bill Beanie, who wrote for the paper at the time. Bill was pretty intrigued by Derek's story, so in November of 1976, he wrote an article on the house. And at that point, when that article was written, neither Bill nor Derek really knew the true identity of Charlie Cook, and so they asked for help from the readers. Letters came pouring in after the article was written. Stories of Charlie, letter after letter. And after a few weeks, Beanie wrote a follow-up article. At this point in time, those who had known Charlie were rather old, and some of the stories are secondhand. But the readers provided a lot of insight and good details to what Charlie was up to during those 20s. So it was suspected that Charlie had a series of pickup spots along the shores of Lake Ontario, maybe places like Sodus or Pulteneyville, or perhaps on the west side near Hamlin. Charlie was well known for driving a 12-cylinder Cords, which was a very fancy car at the time. So Charlie would drive up to the lake late at night, return to his attached garage, carry that scotch down those basement stairs, through the house, and up into the attic, tip that floorboard up, pull those ropes, and hide away that whiskey until he was summoned by one of his customers. Many of the readers from Beanie's article recalled how Charlie enjoyed the patronage of the carriage trade, the elite in Rochester. They would buy his whiskey by the case. One reader recalled that Charlie was referred to as the Prestigious Bootlegger. I wish I had the names of some of those patrons, but Beanie and his sources were pretty good at hiding that. So Charlie was apparently loved by many and reviled by others. In one story, a man recalled how a prominent Rochester businessman living along East Avenue was ratted out by his own teetotaling wife. Apparently she saw Charlie pull up in that fancy car to their house and begin to unload his vile brew. So she called the cops. Charlie was arrested. As far as anyone knows, that was the only time that Charlie was ever caught. Perhaps he was so well respected that a blind eye was turned when Charlie rolled down East Avenue. So I'm the second child of Derek and Judy, the one who was on the way when the house was purchased. My bedroom ended up in the same attic when I was a teenager. And as a kid, I played for hours in those little spaces under the rafters, pulling on those ropes and opening those walls. My father left the moving walls in place, and he enjoyed showing them off from time to time. Over the years, the cotton ropes had rotted away, but the walls remain in operating condition. I suspect they're still there today. And that heavy wooden door with the heavy steel lock, well, the only thing that was transported through there when I was a kid was firewood, used in Derek's ongoing battle to heat that house. And what of Charlie? Well, my father used to tease us with frightening stories. He said that Charlie was going to be angry that we had revealed his past and told this story, and he was going to come after us. He told us to keep an eye out for thugs rolling down our street, hanging off the running boards of fancy cars, wearing fedoras and striped pin suits and carrying Tommy guns or something, yelling things like, "You dirty rats." But that never happened, of course, and if it did, I'd probably be telling that story. In reality, Charlie moved to New York when Prohibition was repealed in 1930. Sometime after that, he opened a legitimate and successful liquor store. Apparently, he had quite the experience. And shortly after Beanie wrote his stories about that Brighton house, Charlie Cook surprised him one day with a phone call. Charlie was nearly 80 years old at that point, but he was really excited about the articles. He thanked Beanie for sharing the stories and allowing him to remember a different time. The Prestigious Bootlegger finished his call with, "Those were the days."